The box weighed almost nothing. That was the part that got to Marisol, not the walking into the pawn shop, not the bell above the door that rang like it was announcing something shameful, but the weight of the box in her hands. 9 years of service, 2 deployments, a commendation she hadn't even known how to explain to her mother, and all of it fit inside a shoebox with room to spare. She'd been sitting in the parking lot for 20 minutes before she got out of the car. The shop was on Meridian Avenue, sandwiched between a check-cashing place and a nail salon that had been closed for 2 months. The sign above the door read Golden State Pobbin and Trady in letters that had once been gold, but had faded to the color of old teeth. She'd driven past it a dozen times over the past week, telling herself she was just looking at her options, that she hadn't decided anything yet. She had, of course. She'd decided the moment she opened her bank account on Tuesday and saw the number sitting there like a bad joke. Inside, the shop smelled like machine oil and carpet cleaner. Glass cases ran along 3 walls, filled with guitars and watches and the kind of jewelry that meant someone else had also had a very bad month. A man behind the counter looked up from his phone. He was maybe 60, with reading glasses pushed up on his forehead and the expression of someone who had heard every story there was to hear and wasn't particularly interested in hearing another one. "Help you?" Marisol set the box on the counter. She didn't open it yet. "I have some medals," she said. "Military. I was told they might be worth something." The man, his name tag read Gary, set down his phone and pulled his glasses onto his nose. He nodded at the box. "Can I?" She pushed it toward him. He lifted the lid carefully, which she hadn't expected, and she found herself grateful for it. He didn't dump them out or poke through them with a pen. He just looked at them for a moment, the way someone looks at something they recognize even if they can't name it. "These yours?" "Yes." "Army?" "Navy." "Hospital Corpsman." "2 tours, Kandahar, then Djibouti." Jerry nodded slowly. He picked up the one on the left, the one she'd been trying not to look at since she took the box down from the shelf that morning. A Navy and Marine Corps Achievement Medal, its ribbon still crisp because she had never once worn it outside of formal occasions. She had kept it wrapped in tissue paper inside the original presentation case for 8 years. "What are you looking to get for them?" She had a number in her head. She had calculated it against her rent, her car payment, the electric bill that was now 3 weeks overdue, and the cost of the prescription she'd been rationing since February. "Whatever's fair," she said. She didn't say, "I need $800 to not lose my apartment." She didn't say, "I haven't worked in 4 months because the hospital, where I gave 12 years of my life, decided I was a liability." She didn't say, "I don't know what else I have left to sell." She was still standing there, watching Jerry examine the medal, when the door opened behind her and the bell rang again. She heard the dog before she turned around. Not barking, just the sound of paws on linoleum, and then a low sound, almost a breath, like an exhale that carried weight in it. She turned and saw a man in his late 40s holding a leather leash, and at the end of the leash was the largest German shepherd she had ever seen in her life. The dog was wearing a tactical vest, olive green with a small patch on the side. His ears were up. His eyes were on the counter, on the box, or maybe on her, she couldn't tell, and he was not moving toward any of the things she might have expected a dog in a pawn shop to move toward. He was just standing there, looking. "Sorry," the man said. He was broad-shouldered, wearing a gray Henley and work pants, with the kind of face that had spent a lot of time in weather. "Remy usually waits outside." He stopped. He was looking at the dog, not at her. The dog had not moved. Remy. The man's voice was quiet, careful, like he was trying not to startle something. "Come on." Remy didn't come on. He took 3 steps forward instead, slow and deliberate, until he was standing beside Marisol at the counter. He put his front paws up on the glass case, not jumping, just rising, leaning, and he lowered his head until his chin was resting near the box. Near the medals, his eyes closed. The 3 of them, Marisol, Jerry, the man with the leash, stood in silence for a moment. "I've never seen him do that," the man said. He wasn't talking to Jerry. He was looking at Marisol. "He's beautiful," she said, because she didn't know what else to say and because it was true. "His name's Remy. He was a military working dog. 11 years with the Navy, then retired out of Coronado." He paused. "I'm Donovan Strand. I adopted him 3 years ago." She looked at the dog again. The closed eyes, the chin resting near the medals, the stillness of him that was nothing like sleep. "Marisol Veiga," she said. Strand looked at the box, at the medals that Jerry had set back inside in a careful row. Then he looked at her, with the kind of look that didn't demand anything but didn't look away either. You serve? Hospital Corpsman, Navy. Something shifted in his face, not pity. She'd had enough pity in the last 4 months to last her a lifetime. It was recognition. The particular recognition of someone who has stood in a place where the air is different and knows, immediately, when they're talking to another person who has been there too. What happened? He asked. She almost didn't answer. She'd stopped explaining herself to people around the 3rd week of the leave she hadn't asked for, when she realized that the story made her sound like either a victim or a troublemaker, and she didn't want to be either. But Remy's eyes opened then, and he looked at her. And something about the way he looked at her made her tell the truth. She had started at Coastal Regional Medical Center in Raleigh 12 years ago, fresh out of her Navy contract, with her HM rating and her trauma experience, and a letter of recommendation from a physician she'd worked alongside in Kandahar who had written, in the plainest terms, that Marisol Veiga was the kind of person you wanted in the room when things went wrong. She'd been good at her job. She knew that without arrogance, the way a carpenter knows their joints are square. Not because they need the compliment, but because the work proves itself. She could start a line in a moving ambulance. She knew what a patient looked like 2 minutes before they coded. She had never in 12 years lost a patient to a mistake she had made. What she had done, 4 months ago, on a Thursday evening in October, was write an incident report. It wasn't even a dramatic incident report. She'd seen something during a medication handoff that shouldn't have happened, a discrepancy in a dosage that was small enough to be plausibly accidental and large enough to matter. She'd flagged it the way she'd been trained to flag it. She'd documented it the way the hospital's own protocols required her to document it. What she hadn't accounted for was that the physician whose name was on that medication order was Dr. Raymond Marsh, head of the ER department, 22 years at Coastal Regional, and the kind of man who had been protected so long by his own seniority that he had forgotten, somewhere along the way, that protection had conditions. She'd found out 3 days later that Marsh had gone to the chief of medicine and characterized the incident report as a pattern of insubordination, that the word unstable had appeared, though not in writing, that 2 nurses who had witnessed the same handoff had, when asked to provide statements, said they hadn't seen anything of note. She'd been placed on administrative leave while the hospital conducted a review. The review had now been ongoing for 4 months. She had spent the first month believing it would resolve itself. She had her documentation. She had the incident report, time-stamped and submitted through the official portal. She had 12 years of performance reviews that used words like exceptional and invaluable and exceeds expectations in every category. She'd spent the 2nd month hiring a lawyer who told her she had a case and then billed her for the consultation. She'd spent the 3rd month selling things. Her grandmother's silver, her 2nd car. A television she'd never watched very much anyway. She was 4 weeks into the 4th month, and she was in a pawn shop on Meridian Avenue, and a retired Navy dog was resting his chin near the medals she had earned, in places she still sometimes dreamed about. Strand listened to all of it without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Remy had not moved from beside her. Jerry had quietly retreated to a stool at the far end of the counter and was doing something on his phone, giving them the particular privacy of a man who has learned when not to be in the middle of things. "What's your lawyer's name?" Strand asked. She blinked. "Kowalski. Rebecca Kowalski. She's in Durham." He nodded slowly. "Do you have a copy of the original incident report? Not a screenshot, the actual submitted file, with the timestamp from the portal?" "I have it on a flash drive at home. I also emailed it to myself the night I submitted it." "Good." He pulled out his phone and wrote something down. "There's an organization called the Military Healthcare Advocacy Network. They specifically handle cases involving veterans and former service members who are being retaliated against in medical settings. I know the director. His name is Tolliver. He was a Navy JAG attorney for 16 years. She stared at him. "I'm not making you a promise," Strand said. "I'm telling you this is a resource that exists. What happened to you? It sounds like textbook whistleblower retaliation, which, in a federally accredited hospital, has specific legal exposure." He looked at Remy. Remy was assigned to a handler who got screwed by the system too. It took 3 years and 4 attorneys and a congressman getting involved, but it got fixed. He paused. The system doesn't fix itself, but it does fix. She didn't trust herself to say anything right away. "Can I take a picture of your number?" she finally said. "I don't have any paper." He held out his phone. She typed her number into his contacts instead, because her hands needed something to do. She picked up the box from the counter. She put the lid back on. She looked at Jerry, who was still very focused on whatever was on his phone. "I'm going to come back," she told him. "Just, not today." Jerry looked up over his reading glasses. He nodded, as if this was a perfectly ordinary thing to say, which she supposed from his end of the counter it probably was. She drove home with the box on the passenger seat and Strand's number in her phone, and she made herself eat something and take the medication she'd been rationing, and she did not cry until she was in the shower, where the sound of the water was enough cover that she didn't have to be quiet about it. Tolliver called her back within 48 hours of Strand sending the introduction. He was brisk in the way that people are brisk when they are busy, and also genuinely good at their jobs, and the first thing he said after she explained the situation was, "Did they put anything in writing about the characterization of your report as insubordination?" "No," she said. "They never do." She could hear him writing something. "But you submitted through the official portal, which means there's a system log of the submission and a record of exactly when the leave notification came after. The gap there is going to be interesting." He paused. "HM2, correct?" "HM2 on discharge. I served 8 years before transitioning to civilian nursing, and you have your DD-214? Yes, send me a copy of that, the incident report with timestamps, and your last 3 performance reviews. Don't send them by email, use the secure upload link I'm going to text you." A pause. "Mrs. Veiga, what they're doing is not unusual. What's unusual is that you documented everything correctly and you didn't recant. Most people don't make it 4 months. They either take the settlement or they take the job back under terms that effectively silence them." He paused again. "I want you to know that the fact that you're still standing and still in possession of everything you need is not a small thing." She sat with that for a moment. "What happens next?" she asked. "I contact the hospital's legal counsel and make a specific inquiry about the timeline of the review. When they understand who is making the inquiry and why, the timeline tends to accelerate." Another pause. "In the meantime, are you managing financially?" She was quiet for a second too long. "There's an emergency assistance fund through the network for exactly this situation," Tolliver said, in a tone that made it clear he had navigated this particular silence many times before. "It's not charity. It's designed for people who are in legal limbo because they did the right thing. I'm going to send you an application. Fill it out tonight." She filled it out that night. 3 weeks later, Coastal Regional's legal team requested a meeting. Rebecca Kowalski went with her. They sat across a conference table from 2 attorneys, whose suits cost more than Marisol's monthly rent, and a representative from the hospital's HR department who spent most of the meeting looking at her notepad. The hospital's attorneys presented what they called a resolution proposal, reinstatement, full back pay for the 4 months of leave, and a letter clarifying that the administrative review had concluded with no findings of misconduct. There was no mention of Dr. Marsh. There was no apology. Kowalski leaned over and murmured, "They're scared." Marisol looked at the 2 attorneys, at the HR representative with her notepad, at the conference room with its view of the hospital parking garage. "I want the incident report formally entered into the record as having been submitted in compliance with protocol," she said. "Not just cleared, entered, and acknowledged." One of the hospital's attorneys began to say something about the scope of the resolution, "And I want confirmation that Dr. Marsh's department is being reviewed by the medical board," she continued. "Not by internal audit, the medical board." There was a silence. "That's not something we can. That's not something you need to commit to today," Kowalski said calmly. "We'll wait." They waited. The meeting lasted another 2 hours. By the end of it, the resolution had been expanded to include formal acknowledgement of the incident report's compliance with protocol and a written commitment to notify the state medical board of the dosage discrepancy for their independent review. It was not everything. There was still no apology. Dr. Marsh's name appeared nowhere in the documents, and Marisol understood, with the clear-eyed certainty she had developed over the past 4 months, that he would probably never face anything that felt proportionate to what he had put her through. But the incident report existed. It was time-stamped and documented and formally acknowledged, and somewhere in the system, it was now permanently attached to the record of what had happened in that medication room in October. She signed the papers. She stood up. She shook Kowalski's hand. In the parking garage afterward, she sat in her car for a moment and thought about the pawn shop on Meridian Avenue, about the bell above the door, about the box that weighed almost nothing and had sat on her passenger seat the whole drive home. She thought about Remy and his closed eyes and his chin resting near the metals. She took out her phone and texted Strand. "It's done. Thank you." He responded 11 minutes later. "Remy says you're welcome." She went back to work on a Monday in February, which felt right to her. Mondays were shift change days when the department was loud and busy and nobody had the particular attention span for drama. She walked in through the employee entrance, swiped her badge, which still worked, which she only realized she'd been uncertain about when the light turned green, and went to the locker room to change into her scrubs. One of the nurses she'd worked with for 7 years, a woman named Patricia Olds, who had a photograph of her granddaughter taped to the inside of her locker door, walked in while Marisol was lacing her shoes. Patricia stopped. She looked at Marisol. She said, "You came back. I came back." Patricia put her bag down. She crossed the locker room and she hugged her, which was not a thing that Patricia Olds typically did, and Marisol stood very still for a moment and let her. "The 2 nurses who gave statements," Marisol said quietly, against Patricia's shoulder. Patricia was quiet. "I know who they are," Marisol said. "I'm not asking. I just want you to know that I understand that they were scared, and I'm not going to make it hard." Patricia stepped back. Her eyes were red at the corners. "They know what they did," she said. "They're going to have to live with that." Marisol nodded. She believed that was true. She also believed it wasn't her job to make sure of it, and that the difference between those two things was something she had learned over the last 4 months in a way she hadn't expected. She went out to the floor. She took her first patient assignment. The charge nurse that morning was a young man she didn't note. They'd hired new staff while she was out, and he handed her the report sheet with a slightly formal courtesy that told her he'd heard about her without knowing quite what he was supposed to do with what he'd heard. "You're Veiga?" he asked. "That's me." He nodded. He seemed to be deciding something. Then he said, "I heard you don't lose patients. Not on my watch." He almost smiled. "Good, because we're running 2 nurses short and 4B is a mess." She pulled on her gloves. She went to 4B. Strand texted her in April to say that Remy had a cardiology appointment and the vet was encouraging. She texted back, "Tell him I said fight." He did, apparently, because he sent her a photo of Remy on the vet table looking deeply unimpressed with the suggestion. In May, Tolliver called to let her know that the state medical board had opened a formal review of Dr. Marsh's prescribing history in the ER and had found 2 additional discrepancies in patient records spanning the previous 18 months. The review was ongoing. He would keep her updated. She thanked him. She hung up. She stood in her kitchen for a moment with her hand still on her phone. There would be more than 2. She knew enough about how these things worked to know that if someone had been careless enough to leave traces in 18 months, he had been careless far longer than that. There would be families who had never known why something went wrong. There would be a number she would probably never learn, attached to names she would never know. She couldn't fix that. She had learned, in the last 7 months, to be precise about what she could and could not fix, because the alternative was a grief that had no edges and nothing to push against. What she could do was exactly what she had done. She had seen something. She had written it down. She had not recanted. She put her phone in her pocket. She had a shift in 2 hours. She took down the box from the shelf in her closet, the shoebox with its medals in their careful row, and she sat with it for a moment on the edge of her bed. She didn't open it. She just held it. It still weighed almost nothing. She thought that was all right now. It had always weighed almost nothing. The weight was never in the objects themselves. It was in what they stood for and what she had almost decided they were worth. She put the box back on the shelf. She went to work. The following October, a year, almost to the day, from the Thursday evening when she had written the incident report, Strand texted her to ask if she wanted to meet for coffee. He added, without being asked, "Remy is doing well. His cardiology results were good." She said yes. They met at a place called Anchor Coffee on Elm Street, which had the particular light of a good autumn morning coming through wide windows, and Remy lay under the table between them with his head on his paws, patient and unhurried, the way he always was. They didn't talk much about what had happened. That was the thing she hadn't expected, that the person who had been there at the beginning would be the easiest person in the world to just have coffee with, because he already knew the part she didn't like to explain. At one point, Strand told her about his own medical discharge, a hearing injury from his 4th deployment that had been misclassified for 2 years before a VA audiologist caught it. He talked about it the way she'd come to recognize as the particular tone of people who had been through the system and out the other side, not bitter, not resolved exactly, but clear. Clear about what happened and clear about where they stood now and the space between those two things. "Does it still make you angry?" she asked. He thought about it honestly, which she appreciated. "Sometimes," he said. "Not often. I used to think that meant I'd let go of something I should have held on to. Now I think it just means I'm more interested in what's in front of me." Remy lifted his head. He put his chin on Marisol's knee, and she felt the weight of it, solid and warm and present. She put her hand on the back of his neck, where his fur was thick. She thought about the morning in the pawn shop, the bell above the door, the box on the counter, the way this dog had walked in from wherever he had been and come to stand beside her without being asked, and rested near the thing she had almost given away. She didn't know what that meant. Exactly. She was a person of science and practical training and 12 years of keeping her observations factual and evidence-based. She didn't have a vocabulary for whatever Remy had done. She only knew that she had not sold the medals, and that the difference between the person who had walked into that pawn shop with a shoebox and the person sitting in this coffee shop with autumn light on the table was not luck. And it wasn't only the help she'd received, though she was grateful for the help, specifically and without qualification. It was that she had written the incident report, and she had not recanted, and she had stayed in possession of what she knew to be true through 4 months of being told, in 100 indirect ways, that she was wrong to trust herself. That was still in her. Whatever else changed, she knew now that it would stay. Remy sighed under the table, long and slow, and she felt it against her leg. "He does that when he's comfortable," Strand said. She kept her hand on Remy's neck. "Good," she said. "Me too."